questions of bioethics and the ethics of artificial intelligence. Today on The Simple Truth, we consecrate everything to the Sacred Heart of Jesus through the Immaculate Heart of Mary and the pure, strong, chaste heart of Saint Joseph. I'm your host, Jim Havens, and our guest today is Dr. Joseph Meaney. He is a Catholic husband and father. He has his PhD in bioethics from the Catholic University of the Sacred Heart in Rome. He's also a senior fellow and past president of the National Catholic Bioethics Center, ncbcenter.org. Dr. Joseph Meaney, welcome back to The Simple Truth. How are you today?
Doing great. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, it's a great blessing to have you back with us. And for some reference for the audience, some great articles that give some further background on the topics today that you can find over at ncbcenter.org that Dr. Meaney has written. The importance of bioethics, bioethics and artificial intelligence, and the ethics of artificial intelligence and in Antiqua et Nova. So that'll give some further background, but we're going to dive into as much as we can today. And I want to start simply with the basics here. First, just nailing down a definition of bioethics. So, Dr. Meaney, how does this sound? Ethics is the broad study of right and wrong in human behavior. Bioethics, a branch of ethics focused specifically on moral questions related to life, health, medicine, and biological sciences. Anything you'd want to add or subtract from that?
No, that's very good.
Okay, and then just to take it a level deeper here. So, is this also true that while ethics is thousands of years old, bioethics as a separate discipline only about 50 to 60 years old? Is that the case?
That's right. The term bioethics was coined in the 1970s, and basically it was kind of coterminous with the biomedical revolution that took place after the Second World War, and just all the amazing developments in biomedicine. Okay, so can you just give us a little bit more context there in terms of specifically what sorts of technologies emerged that spawned this new need for this field of bioethics? Yeah, so actually there were two major things. One of the, that famous film that's out right now about the Nuremberg trials, that actually was one of the things that pushed for the institution, right, of ethics committees and bioethics as a discipline when it came to medical research, all the different abuses that happened during the Second World War in terms of prisoners being subjected to all kinds of experimentation without informed consent. And then, of course, this was happening in scientific research in the United States as well and different other countries. So there were clearly human rights violations taking place in science and medicine that needed to be addressed. And so that kind of human rights approach after the Second World War was important. But then also there was just a development of all these new technologies that had to be analyzed. So one of them was just the creation of dialysis. And so all of a sudden you had the possibility of people not dying of kidney failure, but then the question was who should get the machines because there weren't enough dialysis machines in the beginning for everybody. So there was something called the God Committee, which was a really terrible thing, but it kind of decided who lived and who died in terms of who got access to the medical care. And this kind of issue, right, of rationing of healthcare and of new technologies and developing new technologies and ethical ways to do that really grew at a very, very fast pace over time. But then the other thing that became quite dominant in recent years is also gene editing. And this whole kind of world, right, of biomedicine where one can now do manipulation of the human genome, as well as all the problems that came with, and this started in the 1970s, with in vitro fertilization. But the fact that there were human embryos that were being conceived in laboratories and they then could be experimented upon and all kinds of, abuses that happened with that. So, it's interesting to see how bioethics has really developed in recent decades, because the science has been running at breakneck speed and society has been just trying to keep up in terms of what kind of safeguards and ethical concerns needed to be addressed with all these different technologies and even just the protocols in place in terms of healthcare.
Yes, Dr. Joseph Meaney is with us, and so bioethics extremely important. But this kind of flows into one final question here on a broad overview, and that is that there are many bioethicists with varying perspectives and answers that might even oppose one another. So it seems you could have two bioethicists that are both intelligent, trained, and articulate, and yet reach opposite conclusions because they're not reasoning with the same perspective or worldview. What are the different kinds of bioethicists that are out there and different kinds of bioethical perspectives? And why is the Catholic perspective superior?
Yeah, absolutely. So from the Catholic perspective, one of the founders of Catholic bioethics, Cardinal Elio Screccia, very much took personalism as his founding vision, right? So the dignity of the human person as the guiding force for what is ethical and what is not when it comes to biomedical procedures. And so, how are we enhancing and respecting the dignity of the human person in all these different actions? Or how are we detracting or, abusing the dignity of the human person? And so this has been extraordinarily fruitful in terms of explaining why in vitro fertilization is wrong, why contraception is wrong, why other things, like fertility awareness-based methods and restorative reproductive medicine are very good. And, all these other different perspectives on what kind of healthcare should be offered and what is really not healthcare, but rather an abuse of human rights, such as, euthanasia or physician-assisted suicide, et cetera. But you're absolutely correct in terms of there being many different kinds of bioethics out there. And it basically goes back to the fact that ethics is a branch of philosophy. And as you know, there are so many different schools of philosophy, some of which are extremely contradictory to each other. And in the field of bioethics, I would say one of the most pernicious influences is utilitarianism or consequentialism. So this idea that if one has a kind of measurement, of outcomes, and one can sacrifice some individuals to save others, one can do a little bit of evil that a lot of good may come out of it. This kind of Machiavellian, right? The ends justify the means reasoning is actually fairly common in secular bioethics, and it's extraordinarily evil in the sense that it countenances the sacrificing of human lives or the sacrificing of very important principles simply to achieve some good result, quote unquote. And then, there are other schools of bioethics that could be well applied, but they can also be badly applied. So there's something called principalism, which has been very, very dominant in the United States in the secular context. And it basically has these different principles and says one should, try to maximize these different things. So one of them is benevolence. So that is, doing good. One is non-maleficence. So not doing evil, not, doing bad things. Another one is respecting autonomy, so trying to have informed consent, all these different things, and then another one is justice. And so these are good principles. There's nothing wrong with them. The problem, of course, is that one could take them to extremes. So, for instance, autonomy is fine. We should be respecting people's autonomy, but it's not one of these principles that is universal in terms of there are no limits to autonomy, because clearly, the way this is often phrased is that my right to swing my arm ends where the other person's nose begins, right? One can exercise autonomy to the detriment of others. One can also exercise autonomy to the detriment of oneself. So the clearest example of that is suicide, but also mutilation, self-mutilation, which some individuals say, well, I have the right to, hurt myself. I have the right to kill myself. From a Catholic perspective, and I would say even from a natural law perspective, it doesn't make any sense, right? The person is clearly not reasoning properly if they're hurting themselves, if they are killing themselves. And so, unfortunately, some bioethicists will say, yeah, well, we have to respect a patient's autonomy. If they want to kill themselves, then we have to let them do that. Or if they want to do something that is clearly harmful and not beneficial, but they want to do it, then, who are we to stand, because there's a kind of a relativism in terms of, well, what's right for me may not be right for you. And that is one of the big problems, is that if one accepts a kind of a relativistic worldview, it's very easy to fall into all kinds of abuses. But of course, from the Catholic perspective, we look on reality as being rather objective. Now, we have a subjective view of objective reality, but it's possible to get to what is real. It's not an illusion, but things do exist, and principles are important to follow. So this idea of the dignity of the human person and promoting that dignity and not ever detracting from it is incredibly fruitful in terms of having a good bioethics and a good treatment of patients and individuals.
So I think as you're speaking, it seems quite clear why bioethics is so important. These are huge questions that affect us all, and we need to get them right. And so as these emerging technologies continue to come forward with greater and greater speed, that's going to be even more important as they're affecting humanity at even a greater scale. So we're going to get into some of that. Plus, look, the Catholic bioethical perspective, it's a right perspective of the human person. It's a right understanding of the human person. So thanks be to God that we have this protected by the Catholic faith. But a lot of this, it's not that we need divine revelation necessarily to know this. It's stamped into natural law. It's stamped into the way things work. And so this ought to be accepted by society for the good of all. We're going to be right back with Dr. Meaney. Stay tuned.
iCatholic Mobile is a proud sponsor of the Station of the Cross. Solid connections, reliable data. That's iCatholic Mobile, a 5G wireless provider dedicated to your faith and values. Enjoy unlimited talk and text, dependable coverage nationwide. And every plan has unlimited data and free roaming in Canada and Mexico. iCatholic Mobile, the service that connects you to what matters most. More info at iCatholicMobile.com.
Back to the Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with our guest today, Dr. Joseph Meaney. He's a senior fellow of the National Catholic Bioethics Center, ncbcenter.org. And I do want to recommend, we had Dr. Meaney on a couple months ago. I believe the episode was October 21st, 2025, to be exact, where he was on for our Testimony Tuesday format, shared some of his personal testimony and some of his good work with us. A great episode. So I want to encourage you to go back and check that out when you have some time. You'll hear great stories about proposing to his wife in the grotto at Lourdes, and many other wonderful stories that he tells there. But he also mentions there when he was a University of Dallas undergrad, how he had Dr. Janet Smith as one of his professors for one of 3 classes that he took with her, and one of those 3 classes was bioethics. And so he said that I found bioethics fascinating, the fact that you could apply Catholic moral principles to cutting-edge medical problems with scientific research, and come up with very good answers despite the complexity of the problems. End of quote. So we're going to get into some of the complexity of the problem that we see with this emerging technology we call artificial intelligence, AI. We're going to get to that a little bit later in the show. But first, I do want to pause and also let you know, give you a quick reminder here that if you are buying or selling a home, there's an easy way to help the Station of the Cross at the same time. Real Estate for Life, 1,400 experienced, morally grounded agents in the U.S. and Canada. Visit realestateforlife.org to find a Christ-centered, experienced realtor near you. And don't forget to mention the Station of the Cross. But I do want to, before we get into the discussion on AI and hear those important distinctions and points that need to be made, I do also want to lift this out of Dr. Meaney, your article entitled The Importance of Bioethics. Folks can find this in your essay at ncbcenter.org from October 24th, 2023. You write the following, quote, "Our contemporary world is in desperate need of morally and intellectually sound bioethics. We are in the midst of a perfect storm, combining unprecedented cultural confusion about the nature and identity of the human person and a biotechnological revolution that is fast transforming what was merely science fiction in the past into realistic scientific possibilities today or in the near future," end of quote. So again, in your article, The Importance of Bioethics, you describe a perfect storm of cultural confusion and biotechnological power. Can you unpack that even further for us?
Yeah, I mean, the example I like to give is the mapping of the human genome. So that Human Genome Project, when it first began, was a worldwide, mega research project. It cost several $1 billion. It took, over a decade to map the human genome. And it was an amazing accomplishment to be able to do that. But today you'll see ads, where for a few $100, right, you can spit into a tube and they can map your genome, ancestry of your family and whatever else. It's moving that fast from, what is at the cutting edge to really what is at the grocery store. And so we can see this with gene technology, gene editing, but we can also see it with procedures that are becoming available. I mean, they can now transplant human wombs. They can now put chips into people's brains to make a person who's, paralyzed able to walk again. They can do all kinds of, different artificial intelligence things in terms of, writing an essay with just, a small amount of input. And then they can, the computer can write your term paper for you. So it's really transforming our world from something where we kind of had a grasp of, what's right and what's wrong, to blurring a lot of lines. What is actually healthcare and what is, sort of transhumanism, where we're trying to enhance a person to make them something other than a human being, something bigger or greater or something of that nature. What is our respect for our, genetic patrimony? So the germline gene editing that is being made possible today would not only transform the individuals who receive the gene edits, but all their descendants afterwards. So you could, literally change humanity. What does it mean to be a human person? The traits of a human being by playing around and gene editing the human genome. And, with all the new, not so new actually, so going back to the 1970s, but in vitro fertilization has really opened kind of a Pandora's box in terms of, people personalizing babies, editing their children and deciding who lives and who dies. And, do I want a child with blue eyes and these kinds of traits? And I can sort of select the human embryo that will have those traits and then allow those to be born while killing the others. So it's kind of a very strange situation in which we're living, where there are just so many possibilities. But, what are the ethical choices? That is really kind of becoming a big question. And also end of life. There is so much that can be done to keep a person alive. But the question is, should we be doing that or not? Because in many circumstances, what you're doing is you're keeping the person physically living, but in a very, painful sort of existence where they're receiving just all these machines and medical interventions that are not really healing them. They're sort of just kind of helping them limp along and avoid death, but not really, being curative. So again, the ethical question poses itself, is this extraordinary means that is not morally required, or is an intervention really something that is ordinary means, that is truly curative, truly helpful, and doesn't break the bank in terms of the costs and the burdens associated with it, such that this is something that we would be morally required to do out of our moral obligation to care for our lives and our health.
Yeah, Dr. Joseph Meaney is with us. I want to bring up another example and get your comments on it. This is an example we brought up on the show several times. It's quite alarming, and I think it's a good one to exemplify how concerned we ought to be at this point in human history. So this is a 2023 article on the website of Brown University, an Ivy League school, and this is Dr. Adachi, a Brown University professor of medical science who chaired a National Academy of Medicine workshop on something called IVG, in vitro gametogenesis, discussing the potential implications of creating eggs and sperm from any cell. And so, look, Dr. Adachi, again, not some fringe professor. He's extremely credentialed and very influential. And this is what he says. He says it's only a matter of time before technology will allow scientists to take cells cells from a person's mouth or skin and using a process called IVG, in vitro gametogenesis, turn those cells into human eggs or sperm, which means that those eggs and sperm can then be fertilized to create an embryo, all in a lab. In fact, it's only a matter of time before scientists will be able to use a person's cheek cell to custom create any kind of cell. And then he goes on, of course, he touts the possible benefits of this. He says you could make a neural cell that would perhaps help a paralyzed person walk, or a cell that you could implant in the brain of a patient with Parkinson's disease, and in theory cure Parkinson's disease. So it seems like this is how it's sold as this therapeutic, but then he gets into where they want to take it, which is this ultimately, quote, IVG will essentially simplify IVF for women. They will not have to get hormonal injections. They will not need surgical procedure. Instead, the women in question will simply provide a cell from the inside of their cheek or from their skin. The IVF process would thus become more of a laboratory procedure than a clinical one. The only procedure the woman in question would have to undergo is the placement of an embryo into the uterus. That cannot be avoided, of course, he says, until such time as we can grow embryos outside the womb. This too is under discussion in a separate area of science even as we speak. Goes on to say that in the normal IVF process, you retrieve 10, maybe 14 eggs in IVG. You can create essentially an unlimited number of eggs. There is the potential to create many more human embryos for research or clinical use than current assisted reproductive technologies. He says for the first time in human history, it may become possible for same-sex couples to be the genetic parents of children. And then he goes on from here talking about how in Nature magazine in March, they reported that a technology that involved, among other things, IVG was used in the creation of a rodent with two so-called fathers. So we can imagine, he says, a situation where two males could actually become the genetic parents of a child, although they would still require a surrogate to carry the pregnancy. Now, look, every sane person right now has alarm bells going off. They're doing bioethics, understanding all of the problems and red flags and terrible dangers of this. And yet, at the same time, this is a serious Ivy League professor talking about this, really promoting it, and where this goes at scale, where you could basically do an unlimited number of human embryos, children at an early stage of development, and then pick the one that is the most perfect specimen and kill all the rest. I mean, it's IVF at a scale that is almost unimaginable with this IVG. What are your thoughts when you hear this? Doesn't it seem like there's a window right now where we better get these questions, the fundamental questions that are behind all of these, the philosophical fundamental questions at play here, we better get them right now before these emerging technologies make the wrong answers possible that could be absolutely devastating?
Yeah. Now, it's so important to have a clear vision of the status of the human embryo. And the church has done a really good job of explaining how each human individual has rights from the first moment of conception. And the whole entire IVF industry and what is being proposed here is based on the fact that human embryos have no rights, that, they are essentially property. In fact, if you look at the legislation that is out there for surrogate motherhood, for in vitro fertilization clinics, etc., they almost always refer to the embryo as property. And, that, in terms of alarm bells, I mean, when you start talking about human beings, and there is no scientific doubt that these human embryos are human individuals who are just at an early stage of development, but you and I were all embryos at the beginning, that these are property, that they can be bought, sold, killed with absolutely no consequences. This is truly frightening. And I thought it was very interesting, when the state of Alabama, the state Supreme Court, ruled that parents could sue IVF centers for the wrongful deaths of their embryos. And the IVF center said, well, we're going to shut down because there is no way that we can operate if, the killing of human embryos is something that we can be held liable for because we're just killing them right, left, and center. And people basically caved. The politicians caved and said, it's okay. We're going to give you protection. You can do whatever you want in terms of killing these embryos because, we want to help couples who are suffering from infertility, which is very, very sad because there's so many ways to help couples suffering from infertility that do not involve killing human embryos. And you're right, this technology is kind of, social engineering at its worst, which is basically when one sacrifices human beings in order to, make life better for others, right? So taking some and making their lives difficult or manipulating them at the behest of others. And it's turning everything upside down, right? Normally we think of parents as the ones who sacrifice for their children, but in these circumstances, it's the children who are sacrificed for the pleasure or the needs of the parents.
Yeah, so we better get it right. And we're going to be back with Dr. Meaney in a moment. Stay tuned. Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here. We're very blessed to have Dr. Joseph Meaney as our guest today, Senior Fellow of the National Catholic Bioethics Center, ncbcenter.org. Don't forget about iCatholic Mobile for your mobile phone needs. When you subscribe to iCatholic Mobile, you do help fund the Station of the Cross. Check out iCatholic Mobile, iCatholicMobile.com. Also want to promote the free personal ethics consultation that is available at the NCB Center website, ncbcenter.org. It's described as following: are you a doctor, nurse, patient, healthcare, power of attorney, scientific researcher, medical student or resident, or someone else facing tough ethical decisions in healthcare and biomedical research? Are you a priest, chaplain, friend, family member, or someone else asked to advise on these matters? Our team is here to help you understand and apply the moral teachings of the Catholic Church to the challenges you face. So if you go to ncbcenter.org, you hit the free ethics consults tab at the top of the page. It'll take you to the form where you can ask your question. I think this would be specifically helpful to folks that are in a situation, an end of life situation with a loved one, and they're not quite sure what the lines are, and they're dealing with some morally complex issues. ncbcenter.org, a great resource for you, and they'll get to your specific question if you have one, especially if it's urgent. I believe they get back to you even in like 24 hours. Dr. Meaney, anything further that you'd like to say about that?
Yeah, it's a wonderful resource. It's also very beautiful, right? Because so many people are really willing and interested in doing the right thing. And sometimes it's just very confusing, and there's a lot of emotion involved, particularly when a loved one is concerned. And so to have someone who has a lot of training, who's not, emotionally part of that decision to just kind of help and assist and, just kind of clarify the issues at stake can be very, very helpful. A lot of people are very grateful for that service.
Absolutely. Again, you can find it at ncbcenter.org. And, Dr. Meaney, we are big proponents here of trying to educate and help advance the cause of personhood for the preborn, which is the idea to say, I think the bioethical idea, which is to say it's a scientific fact that life begins at conception, fertilization. That's a scientific fact, not a religious belief. And that means also, though, that every human being is a human person. There is nothing that can say, well, this is a human person, but not a human being, or this is a human being, but not a human person. And therefore, we can treat them differently. We can kill them if we want because they're in one category and not the other. Yet this is the time we live in where we have these separate categories in our nation. This is kind of stamped into the way that law works with respect to really abortion, IVF, all of these things. And it's a problem. We have it right there in the language of the 14th Amendment that every person has equal protection under the laws, and yet not every human being, at least not every preborn human being, is given that equal protection or that due process that is there in the Constitution. So we believe we have a constitutional crisis, that the Supreme Court does need to take this up and make it very clear, when do our inalienable rights begin? And of course, the answer is they begin when we begin. So I just want to ask you, I guess, the bioethical question here. It'd be great to get a real good bioethicist on the record here for us. Isn't that an absolute fact that every human being is a human person? There really is no distinction.
Yeah, it's very telling, I think, when individuals are trying to draw the line and say, okay, this is a human person and this is just a human being. Where do they draw that line? Because there is absolutely no point after conception where you can say, there's a fundamental difference in this individual. It's a continuum. So from that first moment when we come into existence, when we're conceived, all we basically do is grow. All the information is there from the beginning. And all we do is kind of specialize and branch out. But, I like Dr. Seuss, right? Horton hears a who, but a person is a person no matter how small is absolutely correct. I mean, why would, a baby be less of a person than an adult? And, why would a 9-month-old in the womb be more of a person than a child who was just conceived, a few minutes earlier? There's no real logical distinction. I think a lot of it is based on emotion. A lot of it is based on, how do I feel? But, science is really about the facts, the biology of it, the genetics of it. And all of this really substantiates the fact that the human person is associated with the human being. And it's very, very dangerous to say that, one has lost one's personhood. Peter Singer likes to play those games and say, well, an individual who's in a coma, et cetera, and is not conscious and awake, they've sort of become post-persons. And again, they can be killed. Or, before a person develops their autonomy, et cetera, they are not persons. That, ideas have consequences. And those ideas have very deadly consequences. So I think it's just very good to go back to St. John Paul II, who in Evangelium Vitae, the Gospel of Life, said, posed it as a question, right? How could a human individual not be a human person? And I think it's basically the other side that has to prove it somehow, because it's so obvious that that personhood and humanity go together. And so if you're trying to, say, well, a person has to be conscious. Well, there are lots of people who are not conscious, and yet they're still people. And, well, a person needs to have autonomy. Or there are lots of people who lose autonomy, and they're still people. So, all these arguments do not make a lot of sense. They go against personhood beginning at conception. And I think we really have to kind of push back and say, well, our position is logical. How can you defend any other position?
That's right. Yeah, it's very common sense. We were all that size once. And if somebody would have killed us, then they would have killed us. We wouldn't be here. So, we need to, we definitely need to push back hard. And we're in, again, this window of time where with these emerging technologies, if we don't get these questions answered fundamentally, foundationally right now, and I think it would be a great time to do it, seeing that we've got our nation's birthday coming up next year. Let's get back to our foundational principles and get this right about the right to life to every human person. Can we get that right before these technologies run rampant in the wrong direction, possibly here? But I do want to get to this conversation on the ethics of AI, artificial intelligence. In your writings, you distinguish between AI as a tool versus AI substituting for human intelligence. Can you explain why this distinction is so crucial?
Yeah, there's a real temptation to kind of anthropomorphize artificial intelligence. The idea that, somehow this is some kind of artificial life form, some kind of consciousness that's non-human. It's kind of a science fiction sort of dream. But what actually it is mimicking human intelligence. It's processing data in a way that is, extremely fast and extremely accurate and very useful as a tool. But the problem, of course, is when AI is substituting for human beings. So if, you're allowing the computer to write your paper for you in college or in high school, then essentially you're not learning. You have abdicated your education to an artificial intelligence. If you're falling in love, with a virtual girlfriend, you're essentially, doing a kind of fetishism where, you've discarded humanity and you're deceiving yourself into thinking that there's some kind of reciprocal emotion going on, where actually it's just, a computer that has learned how to say the right things to stimulate you or to soothe you or to please you, or, even images that have been created that are, highly artificial, but can make people think that there's something going on there that isn't. So there's a real case of kind of self-deception I would say, with artificial intelligence that is highly problematic. And then there's also the problem of the machines being allowed to do things that are absolutely not in the province of non-humans. So the worst application is these lethal autonomous weapons. Pope Leo has talked about this, but the idea, and this is very much science fiction, that these machines could be out there and targeting and killing human beings with no control whatsoever from a human. And they're basically autonomously going out there swarming and killing. And could this lead to a kind of really dangerous action for humanity? I think it's true, right? To have a situation, we saw this during the Cold War, where individuals were told to launch their nuclear weapons, and they refused because they realized that there was something going wrong. There was probably a mistake, and sure enough, it ended up that the order to launch had been mistakenly given, and thank God that they hadn't been launched. But if the computers had been in control of the missiles, they would have just launched, because they don't really have a conscience. They don't really think twice, and that's where it's just incredibly valuable to have human beings involved in warfare and in so many other areas. But the problem, in a sense, right, is if we view artificial intelligence as something which it is not, so we have a false view of it, or if we use it in ways that are contrary to the dignity of the human person, that go against our need to educate ourselves, our need to develop skills. Taking shortcuts is never a good thing when it comes to education. Now, it can certainly, make our work more productive and do a lot of things quicker and faster, do a lot of research for us, all kinds of different things where it has a real potential. But it can also, and then the church has been very clear about this also, it can go about, creating inequalities where some individuals have access to the artificial intelligence and have all this great productivity, and other people, lose their jobs and are just kicked to the curb because they're not needed anymore. And there should be concern for the common good in how artificial intelligence and all these different algorithms are applied. So, it may be a good thing to have cars and trucks, that can be driven by the computer rather than having a truck driver. But then we have to imagine, all these thousands of truck drivers out there who are making a living doing this. What is going to happen to them? And that is not, an idle concern. We have a right to, the dignity of work. And so, it may be that it's more efficient and easier and better to have, computers driving the trucks. But then we need to be training people to have other jobs and do other things, rather than, just simply saying, well, you're no longer needed, go away, and mass layoffs taking place. So there's definitely a lot of different concerns with the application of artificial intelligence.
Yes, Dr. Joseph Meaney is with us. And as we get into this topic, so it makes me think, well, first of all, I want to say it seems that we all have this prophetic role by nature of our baptism in Christ, to be proclaiming the truth in love in the vital areas in which it is needed in our time. And this is a key one when we look at bioethics and the emerging technologies and all of this. So again, we want to get well formed in all of this, and our great bioethicists out there like Dr. Joseph Meaney, certainly very valuable prophets in our time that we ought to listen to. And yet, we know that a lot of the makers, the people that are the creators and the people that are behind a lot of these emerging technologies don't seem to be particularly moral people, open to listening to Catholic moral principles and the arguments of Catholic bioethicists. Sadly, now they may be. We got to pray and work and, trust God to be working, and you never know. Hopefully there is an openness and some of these creators can get things on the right track. But we also don't see a lot of openness in terms of our leaders in public policy, our politicians, our elected officials, not as much as we ought to, especially the Catholic ones, sadly. They could step in and do something here. But I think where the most openness is you and I, those who are listening here, the people that we are close to. Are we receiving this? How are we to act? We're going to be right back. Stay tuned. Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with our guest today, Dr. Joseph Meaney, Senior Fellow of the National Catholic Bioethics Center, ncbcenter.org. Final segment here. All right, a few things we want to accomplish. We certainly want to give the floor to Dr. Meaney in this final segment to get across anything else he wants to share with us. Also, I got a quick question I want to sneak in there. Maybe we can roll that in there as well. But also, want to put the phone number out real quick. Haven't had a chance to do it yet in this program, but if you've got a burning question, something on this topic that you want to get in on AI, on bioethics, anything at all, now's the time to do it. We can sneak you in real fast here at the end. 1-877-511-5483. That's 1-877-511-5483. All right, Dr. Meaney, the floor is yours. I just want to sneak in if you can add in anything further for us, I think, who are most open to hearing the message that you are so well formed in, that you are sharing, to give us guidance. Maybe we can't get the creators or the public policy makers to do what they need to do with respect to these emerging technologies with AI, but maybe we can do what we're supposed to do and ethically use the tool of AI without going over any boundaries. So any further instruction on that you'd like to share would be helpful as well.
Yeah, I really love St. John Paul II's encyclical letter, Redemptor Hominis. And in that encyclical, he had just a beautiful sentence there about the task of humanity that the Creator gives us. And it consists in the priority of ethics over technology, in the primacy of the person over things, and in the superiority of spirit over matter. And I think that's just great, right? I mean, we have to put ethics before technology, right? Before we develop a technology, we have to think, is it good, right? Is it going to be applied for good or for evil? And when there is a choice between things and people, we have to choose people and not say, wow, we would rather have this or that object rather than a human person. So, choosing a person, giving ourselves to other human beings and not giving ourselves to material gain, et cetera. And again, this belief, and it's so important for conscience, right? That what really counts is eternal life as opposed to this earthly life. And, so we have to act in this world in conscience of the future and realizing that eternal life is what really matters. And we have this life that we're living here on earth to prepare. So I think all those kind of matters are very good.
So then do you propose that we ought to land on AI is not inherently bad, that it can be used in a good way? And then if so, any further guidance for us?
Absolutely. So, I mean, it's important, I think, to realize that there are a lot of seductive aspects of AI, and that children in particular need to be protected because there are many ways that it can suck people in, and that is especially a temptation for children who don't have, the education and life experience to realize that this is just a tool rather than something that, is real and alive, et cetera. And of course, for our educational purposes, we need to be very cautious of technology in general. And a lot of schools are saying, look, it's terrible how screens and addiction to screens has made it more difficult for children to learn some of the basics, reading, writing, and arithmetic and other things. But AI can be extraordinarily powerful in terms of doing research, in terms of, helping us to communicate better, helping us, to do many, many different tasks. And I would say, in terms of some of the, applications in manufacturing and in research can be extraordinarily helpful. It can develop new drugs at a much faster rate. All these different things can be very, very, very positive. But again, not to replace human beings, but rather to be a tool for them to, perform even better and to be under the control of human beings, as opposed to some kind of autonomous world in which the AI can spin off out of control, which, it's not like it's a human being or some kind of artificial life form, but simply it can be programmed to do very terrible things. Computer programs can spin out of control. Computer viruses are a good example of that. And AI can be prone to these types of hallucinations, types of different problems. So there does need to be strict controls.
I know that you've written about deep fakes. Anything you can share with us in terms of guidance on that?
Yeah, so one shouldn't necessarily believe everything that one sees, right? The internet has been really really educational in that way, in terms of, a lot of different hoaxes have taken place, and some of them have almost made it into the news, right? I was almost pulled into this artificial womb hoax that was put out a while back, saying that someone had managed a scientific breakthrough to create an artificial womb to gestate a child all the way through pregnancy. But it turned out it was fake. And so one does have to do research and not just take things at face value, because the fakes are becoming of higher and higher quality. And so there definitely needs to be a healthy skepticism and a certain amount of fact checking, a certain amount of, being cautious about accepting things, because it is possible to copy an individual's voice, an individual's image, make a picture look different from what actually happened in reality. Just generate new sequences that are completely fictional, but they can be presented as facts. So that's a real danger, and it can be a problem in terms of manipulating the electorate. In terms of putting out things that are not true, that make a candidate look good or look bad. And so again, one has to be very cautious, particularly I would say when there's, money to be made or influence to be gained. If these things sound too good to be true, or they're too strange to be true, perhaps they're not true.
So yeah, maybe it'll come full circle and it'll become so prolific, these deep fakes, that everybody knows you can't trust anything, and it's all, manipulated, that it'll push everybody off of their screens, get them back into interacting in real life with one another. Who knows? But anything further that you'd like to share with us today? We only have a couple minutes to go, but feel free, anything at all.
Yeah, I think it's just important to know that AI can do many things exceptionally well, particularly when it comes to data, but it can also be used for great evil. So totalitarian regimes have been using facial recognition technology to control their populations, to, arrest people who are not criminals, but who are simply, resisting regimes out there. And so it is very clear that human rights abuses can take place in terms of, security instruments, et cetera, of these artificial technologies. And we need to be very resistant and to look at our human rights should not be violated by these artificial technologies that are out there. I think also, we're not Luddites, we're not against technology, but we do believe that there should be safeguards in how it's developed and, what kind of control we give to vital infrastructure to machines that can be manipulated, can make mistakes. I think the human control is very, very important.
And as we're in this Advent season, a good time to refresh just in that truth that you mentioned earlier about looking at one another as persons to be loved, not things to be used. Any final, word on that? Just any subtle ways that we can look out for to just make sure that we are improving in really loving one another rather than even using one another when maybe we're not even fully aware of it.
Yeah, a beautiful quotation from Saint Teresa of Calcutta was that love is the only thing that grows the more you give it away. And the human person is meant for love, is meant for self-gift. So the spouses in a married couple are supposed to give themselves one to the other. But in general, we're supposed to give each other to others. And this gift is a beautiful thing. But when one tries to steal or one tries to take or force a gift, it really ruins everything. Think of a Christmas present that you give to yourself. It doesn't have the same quality as one that's given by someone who loves you. So, in terms of just human fulfillment, love is so amazing when it's a gift, as opposed to something that we try and take or manipulate.
Yes, Dr. Joseph Meaney, thank you so much for being with us today. All your good work. Again, folks can find you and that great work over at ncbcenter.org. That's ncbcenter.org. And we've got a great treat. We've got Marie, Dr. Marie Meaney on tomorrow. She's going to share from her book, When Expecting Doesn't Happen, Turning Infertility into a Journey of Hope. God bless you all.